Dinosaur, written by Stephen Llewelyn and performed by Chris Barrie. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell to keep up to date with the latest installments.
Chapter 3. Revelation? Jill, get the computer to scan Lloyd's vitals while I grill him. I want to know if he's lying to me. Yes, Captain. Baines fed the parameters into the computer as Douglas strode into the meeting room, trying unsuccessfully to control his agitation. He carried a list in his head. A crewman dead, his ship heavily damaged, and they were all lost who knew when. He was angry, very angry. A rather dishevelled Lieutenant Geoffrey Lloyd sat at the large table in the centre of the room. He was slumped in his seat, with a lump on his head and dried blood on his face. 2 security operatives levelled stun rifles at him. Nurse Smith rejoined them, looking concerned. The captain acknowledged the younger man. "If he needs a horse pill, give it to him now," he said abruptly. Smith shook his head. "Dr. Flanagan told me not to give him anything until he's checked him out. He suggests this should be soon, Captain." Douglas pulled up a chair, sitting across the table from Lloyd. He stared intently at the man for a full minute. Lloyd, still looking rather dazed, didn't seem overly perturbed by the scrutiny, so Douglas piled straight in. "Lieutenant, there was an explosion that seriously damaged our ship a couple of hours ago, killing one of our crewmates. Know anything about it?" Lloyd struggled to focus for a moment, tried to speak, coughed, and tried again. "I was running final checks before we entered the wormhole. I was knocked out," he said blearily. "Surely your engineering checks should have kept you in engineering, not hovering around the escape pods where Private Jones's team found you," Douglas asked roughly. "My duties take me to every corner of the ship, Captain," Lloyd replied, some of the usual asperity returning to his voice as he continued with deliberate contempt. "That very young officer you chose for chief engineer sends me all over the place tidying up after him." Douglas felt his dislike for the man raise another notch. "Lieutenant Nasaki is chief because he's an extraordinary engineer. He's also your direct superior, and you will speak about him and my other officers with respect in my presence. Is that clear?" Lloyd wore the expression of someone who had swallowed a wasp. "Yes, sir," he answered completely without sincerity. Douglas hailed Chief Nasaki over an open channel. "Chief?" "Nasaki here, sir." "Chief, did you order Lieutenant Lloyd to check the escape pods prior to our jump?" "No, sir," Hero replied. "Gotcha," thought Douglas. "I ordered him to do that yesterday, and he told me it had been completed, sir." "Damn!" Douglas stared at Lloyd for a moment. "Well?" Lloyd seemed to lose focus, taking a moment to return. I can't remember. There was something... He trailed off again, confused once more. Justin, the ship's nurse, spoke quietly. "Sir, I really think he should see Dr. Flanagan now." Douglas considered for the briefest instant before shaking his head. "In a minute," he said, turning back to Lloyd. "That explosion killed crewman Mario Bacchini. What have you got to say about that?" "Killed?" Lloyd rubbed his head. "I don't know about any... Killed?" He fell forward, catching himself at the last instant. "Captain." The nurse did his best to disapprove as politely as possible. Douglas held up his hand. "One last question, Lieutenant. Chief Nasaki put out a call for you to return to your station just prior to the jump. Why did you no answer?" "I must have knocked my comm off in my pocket when I..." Lloyd slumped onto the table, his answer incomplete. "Captain, please," Justin prompted, urgently now. "Oh, all right, take him down to sick bay, but I want him under guard around the clock." He looked at Jones. "Help Smith get him down there, Jones. You're to stay and take the first watch. Ask the Sarge to work out a rota with Major White. He's not to be left alone for a second. Clear?" "Yes, sir." replied Jones, helping the male nurse lift Lloyd to his feet. Between them, they hauled him away. Douglas turned to the security officer seconded from Major White's force. Reading the name tag on his chest, he said, "Thank you for your help, Davis. You can get back to your squad." "Sir." Davis saluted and left. Douglas summoned Commander Baines into the meeting room. "Did we get anything from his readings?" he asked, waving her to a seat. "Not much. A jolt when you said we'd been damaged and we'd lost someone, but anyone might have been shocked by that news. We got another spike when he alleged that he had been running final checks. He may have been lying. The rest of the conversation, though..." She shrugged helplessly. "His vitals were up and down like a yo-yo. He's probably got concussion. It's impossible to say for sure whether he's confused, lying, or both, Captain." "So we've got nothing, then?" Douglas asked angrily. "Even if we had, he didn't know we were scanning him, so it wouldn't have been admissible in court." "What court?" Baines opened her hands apologetically. "Fair enough, but that aside for a moment, all we can be sure of is that he seems to have been the only one in the corridors during class." Douglas nodded. "Have you spoken to Sandeep?" "You mean have I heard the bombshell?" "Yes. After that he buried himself in calculations and I could barely get a word out of him." "I don't suppose by some miracle he's found that he was wrong?" Douglas tried hopefully. Baines shook her head. "Sorry." "What the hell am I going to tell these people, Jill? This was supposed to be a taxi run." "Not your fault." "I'm the captain. Everything's my fault." "James." She leaned over and squeezed his arm. "We'll get through this. Together. Just like always." She gave him a lopsided grin, and Douglas smiled in spite of himself. "So stop being a grumpy old sod and feeling sorry for yourself, is that it?" "I would never say that, Captain," Baines replied with a chuckle. They shared a comradely moment as they tried to push back the growing fear of their situation. Captain Douglas and Commander Baines entered embarkation together, striding straight up onto the dais. Baines stood to the left and just behind Douglas. All the passengers and crew were gathered in anticipation of the captain's address. He took a moment to study the faces before him, and nodding more to himself than anyone else, he began. "Welcome, everyone. This is what we know so far. We have been damaged by a bomb placed in wormhole drive control at some point after we left Earth orbit." Shocked murmurings filled the auditorium. The captain held his hands up for calm, and the crowd, desperate for news, quieted quickly, hushing one another. "We've not yet been able to ascertain who's responsible for this atrocity. Some of you have been working on the forensics we've collected, so we remain hopeful that the culprit or culprits will be found soon." Douglas looked around again, trying to gauge the mood in the room. "It's entirely possible, even likely, that the perpetrator is still hiding among us." This time, the swell of concern took far longer to die away. Some passengers looked angry, some afraid, many both. The captain raised his hands and waited for silence again, fully understanding their fear and agitation. "It is vital we remain vigilant at all times. We are all in danger, as long as this person or these persons are free upon our ship. As you've already heard, one of our engineers, crewman Mario Boccini, was tragically killed by the blast. Murdered." He banged his fist on the console. "Now, I'm telling you, we will find who did this. However, I'm pleased to report that the saboteur has not had it all their own way." Douglas summoned Gleason up onto the dais. "A couple of hours ago, a very brave and completely successful attempt was made to disarm a second bomb discovered attached to the pod's reactor core. Some of you may already know Captain Gleason here. He's an explosives expert working with our miners. He's also the man who quite possibly saved all of our lives today. And I would like you all to join me in giving him a very grateful round of applause for his courage and commitment." Douglas stood back and applauded with everyone else before stepping forward to the mic once more. Very workmanlike, Captain, thank you. He leaned over to Gleeson and spoke quietly. Don't worry, we haven't the time for a speech today. He winked. That's a relief, said Gleeson, and meant it. He was already red to the roots as he stepped back down. Now, back to business, the captain continued. The ship is in good health apart from the wormhole drive, and we're in no danger at the moment. We are, of course, running rigorous checks to every system, and therefore will not be moving for at least 24 hours. So settle in, people. The good news is Earth's only 4 days' travel away. Once we're sure we can engage the engines again safely, we'll be on our way. Also, please remember that we have plenty of provisions, so there's no need for alarm. Okay, Douglas thought. I've bought a little more time. On with the next. I require all department heads to talk with your teams and collate any and all possible information which may help with our situation. Once you've spoken with your people, I'll expect you to join me and my senior staff in the bridge meeting room 2 hours from now. We will then examine what you found and consider our options. A public forum will be convened tomorrow to discuss the matter further. Thank you. Douglas walked away with Baines in tow. Always leave 'em wanting more, hey, Captain? She commented once they were back in the corridor. He raised a wry eyebrow, pointing a thumb back the way they had come. I don't have to tell them anything I don't want to. That's one of the perks of being captain. You can stay and answer their questions, though, if you want to, Commander. No, sir, she said, raising a snappy little salute. That's one of the perks of not being captain. Douglas snorted, wagging an admonishing finger. You'll get your chance. They walked in silence for a little while, each lost in their private thoughts. Actually, James, when you consider the new reality, maybe not. We may be all we have, forever. Still, seeing as I have the only boss, and therefore the best boss in the universe, who am I to complain? Oh, Baines pulled up suddenly outside the doors to the bridge. What is it? Asked Douglas. I've just realized that I must have the worst boss in the universe, too. Douglas aimed a mocking backhand at his first officer, who dutifully ducked underneath to enter the bridge. Now do me a kindness, will you, Jill? He asked. As Mary's being run ragged looking after the passengers, make one of those special coffees for the old man. Actually, scratch that. I'll have a cup of Earl Grey, please. I could do with a little taste of home right now, and Northumberland's close enough for a borderer like me. He rubbed tiredness from his eyes. They were all coming down from the adrenaline of the last few hours. We've bought ourselves a couple of hours to work out how we're going to tell these people about the big problem. And you're not getting out of that conversation, Commander. Baines squeezed his shoulder warmly as he sat, and went off to prepare a captain's special in the bone china set he kept specifically for his northern beverage. Ship time still respected Pacific time, and it was late in the afternoon as department heads began arriving on the bridge. They were greeted by crewman Mary Hutchins, drafted once more to keep the gathering fed and watered. Despite the tension of their situation, Mary was still jolly, ever trying to put people at ease. Even on their usual trips, she always managed to offset the strangeness of the passengers' new surroundings with her down-to-earth friendliness. However, continuing to do so under their current circumstances marked the true strength of her character. Douglas watched with admiration. No matter where she is or what's going on, she's still Mary, he thought. With one or two exceptions, this is a hell of a crew. He allowed himself a brief moment of pride to count his blessings before studying his notes one last time ahead of the meeting. Last to enter was Lieutenant Flanagan, the ship's doctor. Douglas nodded a sombre greeting. Still favouring that left knee, Dave? Flanagan shrugged. It'll need another new one sooner or later, he replied. I knew my days of running around battlefields fixing up a bunch of crazy Green Berets were coming to an end when I hit 40, but when I got my knee shot out, it was time to get the check. He made light of it, but Douglas was deeply respectful of Flanagan's highly decorated U.S. Army career. The USS New World would normally have required only a medic, but given the importance of the mission and the average size of the passenger contingent, policy called for a medical complement of 3 for all Mars carriers, comprising a doctor, a junior doctor, and a nurse. "Still," continued Flanagan, "that's all ancient history now." "Aye, 7 years you've been on my staff for our journeys to Mars, Davy, and I've never been more grateful for it than today," stated Douglas seriously. "I'm sorry I couldn't give you a heads up before this meeting, but when I ordered you to bring sickbay up to the highest state of readiness, I wasn't joking." A shadow passed over Flanagan's normally cheerful face. Douglas sat at the head of the long conference table, facing 5 people seated along either side. "Right, is this everyone?" he asked through the hubbub, calling them all to order. "Yes, Captain," replied Major White from Douglas's far left, "although there was another guy who demanded he be included in this meeting." "Demanded, did he?" Douglas inquired in sweetly Scottish tones. "And who might that have been?" "A guy named Bernstein. Apparently he paid for half of this pod, or so he claims. He said that no decisions could possibly be made without consulting him first, and tried to bully his way past the guards." "Oh, I remember him," said Baines. "What happened, Ford?" "Well, your security sergeant asked him to calm down, there's a good little chap. Bernstein lost his shorts at that point, so the Sarge laid him out because he was upsetting people." He grinned as he recalled the episode. "It was beautiful to behold. Is Jackson a boxer?" "Only on a Saturday night," Douglas quipped. White chuckled, gesturing towards Flanagan. "Anyhow, when Bernstein came to, the doc here was called, but told me that—" "Unfortunately, I was way too busy in sickbay," Flanagan interrupted, his cheerful demeanor returning. "After I was told what happened, I sent Dr. Schultz back down there, Captain." "You were really laughing," said White, looking puzzled. The crew of the New World shared a knowing look. Baines spoke up. "Dr. Heidi Schultz is brilliant, but not exactly known for her patience or tolerance, her gentleness, sympathy. I could go on. Bernstein will have something to cry about now. He was probably better off with the Sarge." White nodded, understanding. "Some of the kids are already calling him Captain America." This comment drew a few sniggers from individuals who had already sampled Mr. Bernstein's company. "Anyway," said Douglas, "we'd better get down to business. Bernstein may be the richest man aboard, but no amount of money will help us at the moment. Let's start with introductions. James Douglas, captain of the USS New World, as I'm sure you know." He pointed to himself before leaning forward to introduce his senior staff up the table. "This is Commander Jill Baines, my first officer. Lieutenant Sandeep Singh, my second officer and ship's pilot. Lieutenant Hiro Nasaki, my chief engineer. Lieutenant David Flanagan, my chief medical officer. And Major Ford White, I already know." Glancing up the table to White, he added, "And by the way, we're very grateful for your help over the last few hours." He gave the Major a nod of gratitude before sitting back. "So that's the military," he concluded. "Forgive me, I don't know the pod science team, so, beginning with the lady to my far right, I'd be grateful if you could introduce yourselves, please."
"Hi, Dr. Samantha Portree, USA. I'm Chief Engineer of the Mining and Construction Team."
"Thank you, Doctor," said Douglas, nodding to the man sitting to her right.
"Another Sam?"
he said.
"I'm Dr. Sam Burton, New Zealand, Chief of Operations for the pod. I'm responsible for resource allocation, maintenance and repairs, that sort of thing."
"Doctor," Douglas nodded again. The next man introduced himself.
"Dr. Satnam Patel from India. Astrophysicist by trade, but on this mission I head up the new environmental team controlling the greenhouse gas-producing factory machines and other mechanical elements of our terraforming efforts."
"Thank you, Dr. Patel." Douglas looked to the woman to Patel's right.
"Dr. Patricia Norris, England. My field is microbiology, and I've been given charge of the team who will be seeding Mars with life."
She looked directly at Douglas.
"I work closely with Dr. Wright, who I believe you already know, Captain, the DNA specialist."
"Indeed I do, Doctor. Do I understand correctly that you will be working together to forensically examine the material we've collected from the bomb sites?"
"Yes, Captain,"
Patricia replied. "And last but by no means least, Douglas prompted the last man with a smile. He returned it and introduced himself. Dr. Jim Miller, England. I'm a chemist and manufacturer, and lead the team who will be working on turning the material Dr. Portree mines for us into more greenhouse factory machines, tools, and, well, anything else the mission and Dr. Patel's team may require, hopefully. He gestured appreciatively towards the American woman seated at the other end of the table. Thank you, doctors. Just being in the room with such a heady group makes me feel more positive about what we face, Douglas acknowledged respectfully. Now, before we get started, do we have a list or at least an idea of the other skills we may have at our disposal amongst the passengers? I must apologize here, but we were only meant to be a taxi service to Mars and weren't required to know each individual on the roll or their assets and skill sets. All that was organized by the brass hats back at NASA, and there simply hasn't been an opportunity for us to examine the roster. Everyone pooled their knowledge, offering what they knew of their fellow passengers. Do we have anything useful amongst the paid seats? Asked Douglas at last, using the colloquial slang term for anyone who got to Mars via financial investment, rather than as part of the science team. Sorry to be blunt, but we need to cut straight to it, he added, softening his question a little. Well, we've got Mr. Bernstein, offered Major White. Yes, at least there's him, added Baines dryly. He's got a $500,000 suit, White moderated reasonably. Fancy, she replied. I was talking to a man earlier called Derek Bond, who really wanted me to call him Dell, said Chief Nasaki, looking perplexed. When no further information followed, Baines prompted the engineer. And? Oh, Hero continued. Well, he said he was some kind of preeminent philosopher, apparently. No terraforming expedition should leave home without one of those, Baines muttered. If he's rich, I suppose he can afford to philosophize all day, continued Hero, unfazed. I think he might be an idiot, he finished, innocently matter-of-fact. Baines snorted her coffee and began to cough as she tried not to laugh. Douglas sighed gently. Remember, we've talked about people skills, Hero. Baines got her control back, taking another drink to ease her throat. Sorry, Captain, said the engineer, but he kept following me around. In the end, I had to tell him to go away. And what did Dell the philosopher say to that? Singh asked, fascinated. The engineer looked slightly confused. He said, Why? Baines coughed again, slapping her chest as she fought for breath. Stop it, she pleaded, choking and laughing at once. The engineer appeared completely bewildered by the jocularity his statement seemed to draw, which in turn drew a few smiles of endearment around the table. I was talking to a Catholic priest before the explosion, said Patricia Norris. Maybe a chat with some of the crew would make them feel a little better, she hazarded. Is he a scientist also? Asked Douglas. Actually, he is a she, she replied. No, she's on a paid-for ticket. Douglas looked impressed. A priest could afford to be here? Thinking about a change in vocation, Captain? Asked Baines innocently. Why wouldn't he have a prayer? He winked. Actually, it's all paid for by the church, continued Patricia. Apparently, they want representation on Mars, so they sent Mother Sarah. I have to say she seems lovely. The Catholic Church has sent a woman priest to Mars? Asked Baines. That's pretty progressive. Being seen to be progressive sounds about right, commented Burton darkly. Fire and brimstone is all out of fashion these days. The modern church is all about apology and capitulation. A few eyebrows rose. Sorry, my father was a fair-weather believer, he explained. A hand-wringer, he finished weakly. People in the group cleared their throats and shuffled uncomfortably. I think there are a couple of historians on board, Jim Miller chipped in brightly, speaking into the embarrassed silence. And I even spoke to a spiritualist medium. Good for staying in touch with where we've been, perhaps, but of limited help where we find ourselves now, I expect. There's a retired chap who used to be a high-flying psychiatrist,
said Patel. Or did he say psychologist? He added, frowning.
He could be useful in the long term, commented Singh, thinking aloud. Long term? Asked Jim Miller. Ah, said Captain Douglas, eyeing Singh. That would be the sound of the cat escaping from the bag. Singh winced. Sorry, Captain. No, it doesn't matter, Sandy, eased Douglas. We've been collating and fact-finding, but ultimately this was always what this meeting was going to be about. Samantha Portree leaned over and looked down the table.
This is the other bad news, isn't it, Captain? I take it this is about the stars being shifted?
Added Patel for good measure. Douglas was impressed.
Well, we weren't going to be able to keep much from you guys for long, he said. Sandeep, tell them what we know.
Lieutenant Singh seemed to take a moment to gather his thoughts, when suddenly he blurted, We're 99.2 million years in the past. A short silence greeted this statement, followed by an elongated silence just ahead of a protracted one.
Thank God you broke that gently,
Satnam Patel said eventually, speaking in rich accented tones to his fellow countrymen.
I might have panicked otherwise.
Say what? Flanagan burst out, absolutely flabbergasted. Douglas gave Singh a look which asked, Seriously? He cleared his throat. Sorry, folks, but that is pretty much the size of it. Sorry, Dave. Now you see why I needed sickbay on high alert. Flanagan appeared thunderstruck, but nodded slowly. I think I'll let my ears do the talking for a while, James, he muttered. Douglas's expression softened. Good man. It seems that the It's a Tuesday, I think, Singh mitigated quietly. Douglas glared at him once more, drumming his fingers a couple of times on the table. As I was saying, he continued, the explosion at the moment the wormhole formed seems to have had an unexpected and rather serious effect.
I feared it was so,
admitted Patel. You'd already worked it out? Asked Douglas. That's very impressive, Doctor.
Just guesses and surmises, Captain, whilst desperately hoping I was wrong.
Can you shed any light on this? Pressed Douglas. Can we reverse it?
You mean recreate the effects of the explosion and return back? Unlikely, Captain. But we should gather every bit of data we can from the locus where the wormhole briefly existed in space. Hopefully, we can correlate it with the information gathered from the explosion site. With time, research, and experimentation, we may be able to calculate the effect on the wormhole and recreate it in some way. But I must stress, Patel looked around the gathered professionals, the chances of being able to exactly recreate the incident which sent us here are extremely poor. At this stage, I would have to say negligible.
Well, use whatever resources you need to collate your information, Doctor, replied Douglas. We'll only get one chance at it.
Patel nodded acknowledgement, while scribbling a few notes to his electronic pad.
Are we really only 4 days from Earth, Captain?
Asked Dr. Portree.
We are, Doctor, more or less.
Perhaps more like 4.5 days now, as we've been drifting without power for a while. We've told no lies, but we thought it better to hold a small meeting before completely spilling the beans to the larger group, if you follow me. I'm guessing we're all shaken up by this news, so who knows what effect it might have on the people down in the pod. We need some kind of plan or strategy, something for them to cling to and work towards, or we'll have a total collapse on our hands if we're not careful. Nods of agreement followed his conclusion, everyone looking thoughtful and anxious. Major White leaned forward.
I take it we have no choice but to go back to Earth?
No point in sticking around here? Unless anyone here can give me a better idea, said Douglas, looking around the table. I can't see what else we can do. It's the only place we can breathe outside this ship, after all.
Forgive my lack of a scientific background, but when we get back to Earth, aren't we going to find it full of dinosaurs and who knows what else? Asked White.
They took a moment to process as the reality of his statement dawned. Does anyone know what we can expect? Asked Douglas eventually. Not just the flora and the fauna either. What about the climate? The people around the table looked from one to another in growing concern.
I guess NASA didn't think we'd need a paleontologist, commented Samantha Portree sheepishly. Patricia Norris raised her hand. I may have some answers for you, Captain.
Douglas looked relieved. Thank you, Doctor. What can you tell us?
Not me. My 16-year-old son, Tim, she answered.
Douglas looked unrelieved. Your son? He asked weakly, trying to remain polite.
Norris smiled indulgently at him. I know what you're thinking, Captain, but you would genuinely struggle to find anyone more knowledgeable about Earth's history in any museum or university across the world. I'm not just saying that as a proud mother. It's his passion, along with his lifelong love of animals.
Douglas exchanged glances with his senior staff. Baines shrugged.
Maybe we should get him up here, Captain.
If he can give us a heads up before we try and land.
Any knowledge would help us at this stage.
I don't want to be a T-Rex tuckbox.
Hero snorted. Imagine a T-Rex's lunchbox. Do you think it would have a sticker of a human on the side? He chortled to himself, oblivious to the stares he received. Engineers rarely have time for the whole appropriate-inappropriate thing, and Hero was a one-man case study in that regard.
That's precisely it, Captain, added Norris. I mean, not the lunchbox thing, but Tim. He will be able to give you a good idea of what types of animals and plants we're likely to encounter wherever we put down. He's got an encyclopedic knowledge of this type of thing, along with untold terabytes of information on his personal storage drives.
Douglas clicked the communicator built into the table. This is Douglas to Sergeant Jackson.
Jackson here, sir.
The barked response was immediate. Sarge, can you organize for Mr. Timothy Norris to be escorted to the bridge, please? He's Dr. Norris's son. Tell him that Dr. Norris thinks he may have some information which might help us.
Right away, sir.
Jim Miller put his head in his hands, exhaling a huge sigh. Are you okay, Doctor? Asked Douglas, concerned. Miller looked up.
I'm sorry, everyone. It's just that I expected to be manufacturing parts for our terraforming machinery on Mars by this time tomorrow. Now I'm on my way back to Earth and about to be given a talk about which dinosaurs I can eat and which ones I need to avoid. My reality's on shuffle.
Nervous agreement greeted his assessment. I'm sorry, people, said Douglas. I really am, but we simply don't have the luxury of an adjustment period. We need to plan and go. When we land, we will be faced with challenges that no human being has ever experienced. However, I've got every confidence in the people here and elsewhere on this vessel. We have some of the most brilliant and brave that mankind has to offer, and I refuse to believe that we will lose ground to a bunch of animals, however big they are. Douglas looked to his second officer. Sandeep, from the scans you've taken of Earth, have you calculated our best approach vector, using the least amount of fuel? For the benefit of the others, he added, although our power core is nuclear, our thrusters are still chemical rockets, so saving as much fuel as possible is vital if we mean to or need to take off again. He checked back with Singh. Where is our best landing opportunity, Lieutenant? I've calculated that the coordinates providing the leanest burn times, replied Singh, checking his notes, are in Patagonia, South America, or what will be South America one day. Naturally, the scientists began tentatively discussing the merits of this course of action when the door chime sounded. Come, said Douglas, clearly above the chatter. The Sarge strode up to the table with a nervous-looking teenager edging into the room behind him.
Mr. Norris, as ordered, Captain.
Thanks, Sarge. Jackson saluted and left. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Norris. Douglas welcomed the young man warmly. Mary, would you be kind enough to organize another chair for our guest, please? Tim watched Mary open an adjoining door, which turned out to be a storage cupboard, and returned to him smiling kindly. I'll put you next to your mom. Thanks, he replied, sitting down a little more heavily than he intended. Please, relax, Mr. Norris, said the captain sympathetically. Do you mind if I call you Tim? No, that's fine, Captain, the young man answered nervously.
Patricia also smiled at her son, crowning his anguish by squeezing his hand in the sort of motherly way calculated to embarrass any almost man to the point where he questions whether he wants to live long enough to make it all the way. He moved his hand off the table immediately, his face stoplight red.
Tim, continued Douglas, oblivious to the young man's agony, we'll have a full, open session tomorrow in which everyone may take part. However, for today, I have to ask you to keep everything you hear in this room absolutely secret. Can you do that?
Yes, Tim's voice croaked. Clearing his throat, he tried again. Yes, Captain.
Thank you, Douglas continued. As you already know, an explosion has destroyed the wormhole drive. But more than that, it affected the wormhole which was created. Instead of propelling us through space to near Mars, it left us where we were, but... He stalled out, studying the youth in front of him. Douglas hated having to inflict something so horrifying on the lad, but what choice did he have? Sighing heavily, he tried again. Basically, Tim, the damaged wormhole sent us back in time. He awaited the young man's reaction. Tim merely frowned, leaning forward slightly. How far back in time? Well, that's why you're here. Not to put too fine a point on it, continued Douglas encouragingly. Your mother has told us that you have an exceptional knowledge of Earth's history. Tim leaned further forward, completely piqued. How far back? He asked again. Douglas rubbed a hand across his jaw, feeling the beginnings of stubble. The better part of 100 million years, give or take, he answered quietly. He expected a meltdown, and leaned forward himself in a consoling manner. Look, Tim, it's all...
Whoa! Shouted Tim. Awesome!
Going to be all right.
What? Asked Douglas, dumbfounded. Seriously? Asked Tim, ecstatic. Douglas looked to Patricia for help, but she was looking at her son with an expression somewhere between exasperation and pride. Baines leaned back, putting her hands behind her head, grinning. Hands up, guys, who feels like a big girl's blouse now. Most of the other adults in the room chuckled or smiled, shaking their heads ruefully.
The kid took it better than I did, said Major White, giving Tim a nod of respect.
So, how can I help? Asked Tim, glancing around the group with interest. You're probably the only person on the ship with any idea of what we'll find when we get home, Patricia answered her son. Actually, you're probably the only person in the universe, Singh added, to his mind, helpfully. No one else will exist for about 98 million years. Baines leaned over and fixed Singh with a look. You're on a roll today, Sandy. I was afraid you might say something inappropriate for a minute there. Singh looked sorry again. We need to know what you know, Tim, Douglas soldiered on, pulling himself together. As much as possible, anyway. For example, where would likely be the safest place to set up a base? Tim took a few moments to think. At this point in time, near the end of the Albian stage of the Cretaceous period of the Mesozoic era, if memory serves, there are dinosaurs, other large reptiles and amphibians on virtually every landmass. There are extraordinarily dangerous animals in every ocean, he pondered some more. I suppose near the poles might be a little safer, if only because the animals there, so far as we know, tended not to grow so huge. But wouldn't living on an ice field make it more difficult for us to live and gather resources? Asked Jim Miller. The poles only ice over during the winter months in this period, Tim countered. As far as we've been able to ascertain, anyway. However, you may still run across one-ton predators even at the poles, descendants of Allosaurus, for example. Even early tyrannosaurs in the north. God help anyone running into one of those.
Would it be any safer back home?
You mean Britain, Captain? Historically, our wildlife has been a little more manageable, true. But we are a long way back, Captain. There are some real terrors around in this period. Tim took a pull from the mug of tea Mary had set before him, to calm his nerves. He grimaced. What the hell is this slop? His expression made his thoughts plain, the realization increasing his self-consciousness still further. He spluttered. Baryonyx, for instance, was a very dangerous predator of the mid-Cretaceous. The very first dinosaur known to science, in fact, was found in Britain, a 10-metre-long killer named Megalosaurus. We also have one of the earliest ancestors of the infamous Tyrannosaur line back home too. Proceratosaurus and Megalosaurus were more than 60 million years further back in time than where we seem to be, though, so there's a good chance they've really upped their game by now. Of course, that's if you can even find Britain in the post-Pangean breakup. Tim realised he was rambling and stopped. Our own time has seen nature decimated, but at this stage, life on Earth knows no bounds, and we'll get to see it all again, he finished, almost breathless in his anticipation.
Yes,
Douglas acknowledged, fervently wishing he could feel so positive about it all. So we're not looking for Albion in Albion, then? Baines quipped. Eh? Douglas gave her a look, one of his succinct ones. Sorry, Captain, she mumbled. We'd do well to stay away from North Africa, Tim continued, almost to himself, trotting across a prehistoric globe in his mind. China would be lethal too. Another moment of reflection, and he added, We should also try to avoid Patagonia. Just as Lieutenant Singh blurted, But we need to land in Patagonia. Everyone looked at Singh. What's Pangean? He asked. Before Tim could explain, Baines groaned, putting her head down on the table and covering it with her hands.
Dinosaur, written by Stephen Llewelyn and performed by Chris Barrie. New installments uploaded each week. Subscribe for more. Visit the link in the description for free New World companion stories, available for download as ebooks.